Growing up with a Wii, I never had the chance to play Metroidvania. However, my switch to PC gaming during my adolescence allowed me to experiment with a wider variety of genres. I first heard of After Death through a YouTube video by user Rangress, in which they fought all of the game's bosses without taking damage. I decided that what I watched looked fun and purchased the game soon after. After beating it, I loved it. After Death became one of the most revisited titles in my Steam library. For a while, I would use every little update that the game received as an excuse to start up another playthrough. However, it's been a while since I last completed a full run. I've played a hell of a lot more Metroidvanias since then, and I had a great time with them too, so my standards for the genre are a lot higher than they used to be. I also didn't have a big selection of games back then, so After Death was one of my only options. With this not being the case anymore, I'm curious. Does this game still hold up for me years later? And can I recommend it to others as an entry point into Metroidvanias? After Death begins with our protagonist, the creatively named Skull, waking up in an unknown world with amnesia. The domain he finds himself in is gloomy and filled with hostile creatures. The only other intelligent life he can find are floating souls that he can talk to when near gargoyles. The most notable of them is a blue spirit named Ignaro. Ignaro explains that this world was created by a being known as the Sculptor, who designed this realm to be a prison for the souls. He explains that the only way out is to open up a portal by slaying 12 guards. As a soul, however, Ignaro cannot defeat them himself. But seeing as how Skull has a physical body, Ignaro encourages him to take them out on his behalf. With nothing better to do, yeah, that really is more or less the stated reason, Skull takes on this quest. Worryingly, Ignaro becomes increasingly unhinged as more guards begin to fall. Not even halfway into the adventure, he begins talking constantly about wanting the Sculptor dead and talking him into suicide. Out of all the other souls Skull meets, the next most important is Infectus. He believes that the Sculptor made the correct decision in sealing them in this world, viewing it as safety from something potentially even more dangerous. And he views Ignaro's attempts to open the portal as being rooted in selfishness. Late into the game, however, Infectus begins to shift more towards Ignaro's position, and by the end, he is completely on board with opening the portal. I wish this was done differently. Infectus' change of heart comes so late into the game that I initially assumed he was being blackmailed or brainwashed by Ignaro. And can you blame me? Ignaro was so desperate to get that portal open that I could easily believe he would resort to foul play to get his way. But no, it turns out to be a genuine change of heart on Infectus' end. I would have preferred Infectus slowly change his mind over the course of the game. It would have come off as more natural. Next up is Memory. According to Infectus, Memory had seen what was behind the portal prior to it being closed off, but he immediately erased his memory after witnessing it. He serves as a moderate between Infectus and Ignaro and as a tool to dump exposition about this world as he slowly begins to recall his memories. Then there's Fortitude, who isn't very important to the story, but I'll talk about him more when we discuss gameplay. There exist two other souls named Timor and Curiositas, though none of the others have seen them for a long time. Eventually, Memory is able to recall Skull's real name, Notitia. He reveals that Notitia is technically a spirit like the others, but for some reason he has the unique ability to control a physical body without the help of the gargoyles. Throughout his journey, Notitia experiences various hallucinations of being in a hospital or overhearing people talking about someone's condition. Upon defeating the last guard, Ignaro calls Notitia back to the portal, and along with the other floating souls Notitia has met to this point, reveals the true nature of this world. As it turns out, Notitia has been in a coma for years. The world he's been traveling around has been a dream, and the floating spirits are just different parts of his brain who are attempting to rationalize what has happened to him. Ignaro's motive, as the spirit of unconsciousness, was to convince Notitia, the spirit of consciousness, to accept his death, and the portal was the barrier preventing them from dying. This means that Notitia, as the creator of this world, was the Sculptor all along. Ordinarily, I hate these "it's all just a dream" plot twists because they far too often remove any stakes in the story. So it's really refreshing to see a twist like this that actually carries real-world consequences. This revelation also changes the light I view Ignaro in. This character that I once considered entirely self-serving turned out to genuinely care about the well-being of everyone else. It was a nice subversion of my expectations. Before Notitia enters the portal, however, he notices another floating soul, this time with a green color he's never seen before, listening in on the conversation and leaving for another area. Depending on the actions that Notitia takes from this point, the story can go one of two directions. If Notitia enters the portal immediately, he encounters Timor, the spirit of fear and the last part of his brain unwilling to accept death. The two fight, and Notitia emerges victorious. Understanding that he can no longer prevent their death, Timor surrenders, saying that he only desired to protect everyone, and Notitia responds that he no longer needs protection from his fate. The game then ends with their death. While this ending is pretty cool, it's not the best ending that the player can achieve. Let's rewind a bit back to that green floating soul. This time, Notitia follows it. Following the green floating soul, Notitia goes to a secret room, where it's revealed that the soul is Curiositas, the spirit of curiosity. Curiositas tells Notitia that a better outcome exists for them than what Ignaro can provide. He urges Notitia to search for 5 masks to place in the portal, which I have some words for, but we'll talk about that later. When this happens, the portal takes Notitia to a new location, where he can directly confront what has caused his coma, a parasite. Notitia fights and pacifies the parasite just in time for the other floating souls to come in with antibodies, putting it down for good. All of the souls talk about how excited they are to be able to experience the real world again, and while their recovery will be a struggle, they know the brunt of the work is now behind them. Overall, the story of After Death is pretty great. I think that most of the characters have well-defined personalities and motives, the mystery regarding this world's true nature and origin is intriguing, and it has a twist that's both surprising and satisfying. I do have one small issue, however, and that's the translation. It's very good for the most part, don't get me wrong, but sometimes dialogue reads awkwardly. The most egregious example is when Memory remarks that Notitia has been in his coma for over than 2 years. According to the secret credits room, this game was developed by 2 people, Nolan Duluyog and Vincent Derriette. And from what I read in an article about the game by Angry Duck Gamer, they're both French, and I'm assuming neither of them speak English as their native language, so I'm willing to give them a pass. Visually, After Death is stunning. There are 7 major areas that Skull traverses through, and all of them look gorgeous. It's a lot of the little touches that I absolutely love, like the blaring mineshaft lights in the cave, the twisted fine bodies of the crouched skulls, or the eyes of these puppets in the tundra following you. I also love how when walking from one zone of the world to another, you can see a gradual change in level aesthetics. In most games, when you enter a different area, there's this sudden change in the environment. I've always found this jarring. After Death addresses this by having zones blend together. This can be seen here, where the tundra gradually transforms into the library. It makes the world seem more natural. The visual element of the game is complemented by a fantastic soundtrack composed by Francisco Cerda. I always look forward to hearing this rock track in the caverns. I also enjoy the library theme. It starts off a little slow, but it gradually ramps up to match the intensity of the area it plays in. And I'll always love the opening notes of the final boss, which has never failed to hype me up for the last fight. But my favorite track in the whole game is Hopes from the Abyss, which plays in the underwater area. It's surprisingly slow in comparison to most of the tracks in the game, but it still hits with that same impact for me. But it's not the story nor the presentation that makes After Death the great game that it is. The real reason why I became such a huge fan is because of its gameplay, which, much to my delight, is still some of the best I've seen in this genre. The first half of the game is pretty linear. Due to a lack of upgrades, Skull is forced to go to areas in a certain order. However, as more of them are collected, Skull will have so many movement options that the player can start choosing which parts of the map to explore next. When I first played After Death, this initial linearity allowed me to not feel overwhelmed with choices. It also helps that for the first 6 guards, their general location is shown on the map, making tracking them down rather easy. By the time that the game opened up, I felt like I was finally ready for the freedom to decide where I wanted to go. As mentioned previously, the world is also filled with many gargoyle statues, though only 4 of them impact the gameplay. Memory's statues act as a save and heal point, and Infectus's serve as a means of teleporting across the world. Their statues are marked on the map with red and yellow symbols respectively, which is much appreciated. Ignaro holds on to upgrades that are required for progression, which you almost always collect after defeating a guard. Some of these upgrades are pretty much expected for games in this genre, such as the double jump and the spider transformation, which is basically a morph ball with better mobility. For more unique upgrades, there are the fire and ice spells, which can not only be used to freeze and melt water, but also deal damage to enemies. Especially after unlocking the damage boost upgrades to them in the game's latter half, they can actually be more effective at defeating enemies than Skull's standard punch if you can remember enemy weaknesses. Finally, there are the fireflies, which I hate, but I'll talk more about them later. Finally, there's Fortitude. He holds upgrades that are not technically required for getting to the end, but you should grab as many of them as you can. His upgrades include world maps, extra health, and attack buffs. And while these aren't as flashy and unique as Ignaro's items, collecting them will make progression significantly easier for you. Almost too easy, to be honest. The new areas that open up to the player upon collecting these upgrades don't get increasingly difficult to compensate for Skull's increased power, leading to the game getting easier to play as more guards begin to fall. Hell, the guards themselves are a really good example of this wonky difficulty progression. The first guard that I fought was easily one of the hardest bosses in the game. Having so little health, coupled with the weak default punch being Skull's only attack, led to several attempts at beating it during my first playthrough. Meanwhile, the final few guards are pathetically easy, partly because my increased attack power shredded through their health. And even if I took damage, I had so much health myself by this point that I wouldn't have had to care if I got hit. But this isn't necessarily a bad thing, though. After Death's difficulty curve makes me feel as if I'm being rewarded for my work collecting all of these upgrades. This world that once gave me hell is now falling apart in my presence, and that feeling is pretty satisfying. It's one of the main reasons why I went back to this game as often as I did. I admittedly love the power trip. Once you get to the final bosses, however, the game has a huge spike in difficulty, which certainly caught me off guard during my first playthrough. That secret boss especially is really rough for a newcomer. The standout feature of After Death is its level design. In the Metroidvania genre, it's far too common for developers to hide items behind otherwise normal-looking terrain. This was the case as far back as the original Metroid on NES, and this type of level design is still prevalent in modern Metroidvanias. I've always considered this to be poor level design. Why are only these specific blocks breakable? Why can I walk through this specific wall? And on top of that, the moment that a game contains one area like this, I immediately think, oh god, there's probably more of these, aren't there? And now I feel the need to shoot or rub up against every single object in the game because I'm suspicious that it might be hiding a secret. Level design like this is the main reason why I don't bother to go for every single item in most Metroidvanias, at least not without a guide. It's just not worth the headache. However, After Death's world isn't designed like this. I never came across some random wall that I could walk through, or some normal-looking tile that I could break. Any player should have no difficulty finding all of the items without consulting a guide, and it's so refreshing to see this kind of design in a game like this. This player-friendly world design alleviates the tedium that plagues 100% runs of most Metroidvanias. All of a sudden, the task of collecting every item actually feels like a fun challenge rather than a massive pain in the ass. Seriously, After Death's level design is so solid that the world maps of other Metroidvanias released around this time feel primitive in comparison. That is until the player decides to go for the true ending. Remember those fireflies I told you about earlier? Here's their function. The fireflies are able to guide you towards secret rooms on the map that look no different from their surroundings. In order to obtain the masks for the true ending, the player is expected to travel across the entire world map all over again in hopes that the fireflies will point out another secret room. Making this even worse is that even if all 5 masks are discovered, this does not mean that the player achieves 100% completion. There are several secret rooms in the game that do not provide a mask but still count towards discovering everything. So even if one obtains all of the masks, they'll still have to retread the entire map just in case there's one more secret to discover. Or you could just do what I did and use a guide. That's preferable. It's a shame to see the game take the very intelligent level design that existed throughout the main adventure and toss it out the window at the last minute.
Hey, you Levi, you wanna buy?
Though I'm ending the review on a negative note, I want to make clear that After Death is still more than worth your attention. Which is something that this game has been struggling to get, actually. As of right now, it's only available through Steam, and that platform doesn't have any way to find out how many copies of a game have been sold. However, I'm going to take a guess based on how many reviews the game has that sales have not exactly been through the roof. On top of this, most YouTube videos about After Death fail to hit over 1,000 views, with the exception of Rangress's video that I mentioned earlier. I'm sure that part of this has to do with the game's title, since looking up After Death gave me a lot of search results that were completely unrelated to the game, but I also think that market oversaturation has been an obstacle as well. Metroidvanias are one of the most common types of game for indie developers to create, so when another random indie Metroidvania releases, it's not viewed as being particularly noteworthy. But I think After Death deserves a lot more recognition than it's received, and hopefully this video can be the start of that. While recording another playthrough for this review, I'm happy to say that I still view the game as highly as I did back when I first played it, and I hope that after seeing this video, you'll buy and enjoy it just as much as I did.